Mrs. Roque was in the black container intact. The edges of that container were fastened with rubber hooks. Mr. Malou said that was not going to be with the people he already knew. When we lowered Mrs. Roque's body to the basement, he lifted her up with me because he asked for my support. Mr. Malou took the lifeless body of the lady to his house.
Floridalma Roque was a 59-year-old woman who wanted to feel younger when she looked in the mirror. With great excitement, she underwent a seemingly low-risk cosmetic surgery. What the patient didn't know was that she had placed her full trust in a so-called professional who called himself the Doctor of Death. A plastic surgeon named Kevin Malou, who, living up to his nickname, removed the patient without vital signs hidden in a trash container, thus leaving one of the most disturbing images captured on video inside a hospital. An entire medical team involved in the case became complicit in murder and an absolutely chilling plot to evade justice by staging a real spectacle with the purpose of making the patient's family believe that she had walked out of the clinic on her own, alive and in perfect health, when the reality was the complete opposite. During the investigation, it seemed that they had a fairly solid pact of silence. However, time began to crack that promise of saying nothing, and then horrifying details about what happened began to emerge.
Who was the one who decided and coordinated the disappearance of that body?
I think I already gave my answer before. I said that Mr. Malou had already planned it, and he told us that he didn't care what we were going to say or do because he had already made the decision anyway.
Born in the year of 64, Mrs. Roque had the opportunity to live in Guatemala for a few years before moving to the United States in search of a better quality of life. It is known about her that she was always a persevering woman, dedicated and with the firm conviction to surpass herself in the work and personal field. Being nursing what she was most passionate about, she dedicated herself to it for a long time, especially having in her hands the responsibility of taking care of elderly people, a task she fulfilled with the greatest possible vocation. Everything seems to indicate that although she had to strive to achieve her goals, the woman was able to have a good life. She became the mother of two boys named Jose and Jorge Lopez Roque, who later made their lives in Guatemala and Mexico. Despite the distance, the family always stayed in touch, managing to be united and looking out for each other at all times. That's why, when tragedy struck her, in the most horrifying way possible, both Jose and Jorge were absolutely devastated.
It breaks our heart because where is humanity? Where is the compassion for people? The truth is, we are like a family. We are deeply hurt. By the way they acted against my mother.
Floridalma never imagined that all her personal and work happiness would have a fatal outcome when she suddenly wanted to make a small change to her face. She was a very cheerful woman, full of life and still with many goals ahead, which is why she thought it was a good idea to reflect on the outside that vitality she still held. A facial rejuvenation didn't sound bad at all. It was a quick procedure with few complications, so once she decided to do it, there was no human power that could deter her from existing. Besides, it was a cosmetic surgery that professionals usually carry out without problems. What could go wrong in this case? In this, let's say, simple operation? That's what the woman was wondering. So, very excited and happy with her new plan, she told her family what she would do. Naturally, her children supported her as they always did, but on this occasion, they did tell her to thoroughly research the place where she was going to have the plastic surgery. From that moment on, Floridalma dedicated herself to requesting information, meeting doctors, and above all, investigating the history or track record of the doctor to whom she would entrust her life. Finally, after considering some hospitals, she leaned towards a clinic called Perfectima Body, which is located in a building in Zone 14 in Guatemala. this area being one of the most prestigious and known for its high socioeconomic level. However, the high status of the area was not the main reason why Mrs. Roque decided to have surgery at the Perfectima clinic, but in fact, she already had previous experience there with some simpler cosmetic touch-ups, all under the care of Dr. Kevin, the professional, I repeat to you, in quotes, who in one way or another had already earned her trust due to all the positive results before. In addition, the academic background of this 48-year-old man was not lacking in degrees or experience. His good reputation preceded him, as well as his specialized studies in reconstructive plastic surgery in Mexico City. From the outside and with the data available to the public, this doctor then seemed the ideal choice. So he had no impediment to being chosen by the woman who would undergo the intervention. Unfortunately, had she delved deeper into his past, Floridalma would have realized the terrible things he was hiding. And thanks to his important contacts, until then he had kept them under lock and key, away from new patients who could actually become new victims. To top it off, the man had a very particular or peculiar way of presenting himself through social media. There he did not limit himself to hiding his strange taste for the supernatural and skulls, which gave him the idea to call himself the Dead Doctor, a nickname to which he paid tribute due to his reprehensible actions. But you're about to find out why. And for obvious reasons, Dr. Kevin gave a different impression inside the clinic. There he presented himself to patients as an upright professional man whose work showed a way of backing up by recording a before and after of the results of his surgeries, of which he only took those that could be considered as success stories. In early June of 2023, she was already finalizing details for the anticipated trip. She packed her bags in which she not only put her clothes, but also the hopes of having a younger, renewed, and fresh appearance. She was fulfilling her dreams, although what made her happiest was the fact of reuniting with her family, and especially with her son Jose, who would receive her in Guatemala. So exactly on June 3rd, she took the plane that would take her to the new adventure of her life. She was overjoyed, especially when she arrived at the first stop in Honduras. She was welcomed there warmly. They were wonderful days spent with her loved ones, and unfortunately, they were also the last she would spend with them. After that short stay in the city of her birth, it was time to say goodbye and catch the flight that would take her directly to La Aurora International Airport in Guatemala. Jose Roque gave his mother a strong hug before she went on to arrange her admission to the clinic. The first step involved some preliminary tests to determine her health status and ensure everything was in order for the procedure. She asked one of her best friends, Mrs. Rosario Sandoval, to accompany her. Her appointment was scheduled for the day before the surgery on June 12th. Meanwhile, she was told that the conditions for the procedure were optimal. It was just a matter of waiting for the agreed-upon time to arrive. It was the morning of June 13th, 2023. Floridalma woke up very excited. Her friend Rosario was also happy for her. So she planned to accompany her and stay in the hospital during the procedure. Both arrived at the facility very confident that the next day, around 10 in the morning, they would return home to begin recovery. However, the hospital staff told Rosario that she couldn't stay there, that it was best to go home and return the next morning to meet the patient ready to leave. Under those conditions, then, they had to say goodbye, but neither had a bad feeling about it. In fact, there is a record of the last messages the woman shared with her son, telling him that she would be admitted at 7 in the morning. Both shared some audios thinking they would see each other again.
Take care, folks. See you soon. Good morning, my boy. May God bless you.
The next thing was to pay an amount of $9,330 for the plastic surgery and then have a brief conversation with Dr. Kevin. There he showed her a catalog of his apparent success cases, and then the woman was admitted. Meanwhile, Floridalma's family was anxiously waiting for news, even though it practically seemed like a routine procedure. The fact that she was in the operating room had her children very uneasy because hours passed without having a single piece of information about her health status. Naturally, catastrophic thoughts didn't take long to appear. However, a sudden call from the hospital reassured them quite a bit. It was one of the nurses notifying that fortunately everything had gone well. On June 14th, Rosario arrived at the clinic just as they had told her, as they had promised her. They were both supposed to go to Mrs. Roque's family's house, but when she asked about her, she got an unexpected answer. The patient Floridalma left the hospital at 7 in the morning. This was what the doctor informed her, which was very hard to believe, not so much because of her condition, but because there was already an agreement between her and Rosario. Why didn't she wait for me? That's what the very worried friend was asking herself. At that moment, everything began to take an unpleasant path full of doubts and uncertainty, as Dr. Kevin's response left much to be desired in terms of reliability, especially after he assured that the patient had ordered a ride from an app, a habit she absolutely did not have. Now, if her early discharge was true, why wasn't she home yet? Why wasn't she answering her cell phone? Her children knew something was not right, so without thinking twice, they chose to report the disappearance of the recently operated woman. An alert was activated immediately to locate her. In it, her main characteristics were detailed and the last information known about her was specified.
A woman of average height, slender, 59 years old, brown hair, brown eyes.
Soon the news became public and quickly caught the attention of the community.
I believe something happened to her. She didn't just leave and disappear. She's not communicating because she left this world. She doesn't know anyone and has vanished.
The surgeon and owner of the clinic issued a statement explaining that the patient requested her discharge, so she was accompanied in a wheelchair and then got into a vehicle.
But what was most striking about this job was the confident way in which Mrs. Floridalma's discharge was expressed, which was apparently recorded by security cameras, leaving through the main door in a wheelchair.
The public ministry is already in possession of both the reports from the police investigators and the videos in which the patient calmly leaves in front of dozens of witnesses.
Dr. Kevin maintained without a doubt that his patient was discharged under all due protocols. What he never imagined was that a deeper investigation would completely demolish his supposed alibi. This happened mainly due to the images that were presented to the public ministry, which in reality were of terrible quality, and in fact only served for the Roque brothers to realize that the woman's body structure did not resemble their mother's at all.
It's not her, they said without hesitation.
Practically, the relatives of the missing woman were between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, the clinic that wanted to disassociate itself from the matter, and on the other, a recently operated patient without showing signs of having been discharged. Meanwhile, the authorities did not give up and analyzed all possible lines of investigation. For them, the hospital had something hidden, especially the team that was in the operating room during the aesthetic suffering. But the truth is that they did not give details of the case until suddenly an arrest was made. Dr. Kevin, nurses Susana Emilia Rojas Cruz and Luis Alfredo Castro Molina, as well as the anesthesiologist named Lydia Silva, were at the mercy of the authorities thanks to an arrest warrant that quickly became known in the media. Each of them being accused of the crimes of kidnapping and obstruction of criminal action. However, as the investigation progressed, the story became murkier, as not only was the medical team lying about the patient's discharge, but they were all accomplices in hiding her body. By August 2nd, Toto pointed out that the main mastermind behind the disappearance was none other than Dr. Kevin, who was transferred to the Zavala Detention Center that same day. This due to the fact that he was given preventive detention until the day he could testify. 2 days later, at the first hearing, the reasons why the medical team was detained began to emerge. The security cameras showed a terrifying story, which began at the moment the patient arrived at the clinic. Floridalma could be seen entering the institution, but she could no longer be distinguished when leaving. Instead, it was shown how one of the nurses impersonated her to stage a play and generate an alibi.
The truth was that a complication had arisen during the surgery, one that Dr. Kevin initially did not want to give importance to until he realized that things would become very grim. In the hospital's call log, a desperate request for an anticoagulant and an ambulance for a patient with bradycardia could be detected. At that moment, the exact details of what had happened were not known, but it was very easy to guess that things were not looking good at all.
So the next thing was, to simulate the patient's discharge with the help of a nurse. Nurse Louise was caught pushing a wheelchair with who was allegedly Mrs. Roque, dressed in the same clothes and her face completely bandaged, making it impossible to distinguish her true face. Once then, outside the facilities, you can see how she gets into a taxi, which takes her to the 10 zone of the city. However, the traffic security cameras revealed that following the means of transportation in which the lady is supposed to be traveling, there is a black van later attributed to Dr. Kevin, the same owner who later picks up the supposed patient, who in reality is a nurse named Susana, and then both head towards the clinic. And as if that were not enough, and to still add terror to the sequence of events, both the nurse Louise and the Dr. Kevin are recorded taking out black bags from the hospital, as well as a trash can in which it is presumed the woman's body was surely deposited, as this container could not be located in the vicinity of the institution.
You realized that the outlook was not at all favorable regarding the doctor.
Then it was said that he withdrew a total of $118,000 from his bank account to distribute them among the medical team, hoping that he could buy their silence and complicity. Furthermore, as more time passed, more terrifying, creepy things were discovered about the doctor in question. It was as if his past was emerging so that justice could finally be done for his crimes. It was not the first time he faced a negligence charge. One of them, for example, occurred in the year, not long ago, in 2019, where he caused some injuries to a patient that left her paralyzed. Another, in 2020, he was accused of manslaughter due to the unexplained death of a girl named Joanna Molina, whose death he attributed to a supposed respiratory arrest. In addition to this, his violent personality came to light, as apparently throughout his life he has pointed a gun at some or many people, including his partner and his brother. And with all this information and incriminating evidence, it was better to suspend the medical centers of which this individual was the owner. Many things were happening simultaneously. But the only thing that remained unresolved was the whereabouts of Floridalma, whose body was crucial to be able to accuse this monster of murder and his accomplices of complicity.
How sad. Hopefully, they will find her soon, because this was the second time that Floridalma traveled to Guatemala to undergo surgery with the same doctor even, who assured that he continues to cooperate with the investigation and that he does not know what happened to his patient.
However, very little time was left before one of the nurses finally decided to give his version of the events. Perhaps out of regret for some deal with the authorities or whatever reason that led him to confess, the important thing is that he put on the table the name of the true mastermind of such a crime, still fearing, of course, for his own life. And then, almost a year later, on May 2nd, 2024, the woman's remains were still abandoned in an unknown location, but things took a chilling turn with that confession.
He had already planned it. He told us that he didn't care what we were going to say or do because he had already made up his mind anyway, and that he was going to do it jointly with other people who were not present with us and did not work in the institutions, but were strangers to us and who I still do not know to this day. But the way to dispose of Mrs. Roque's body was only planned, organized, and directed by Mr. Maloof and by other people I do not know.
Subsequently, the nurse Louise went on to recount all the details that surrounded Mrs. Roque's surgery, whose complications occurred in the middle of it between 8 in the morning and 12 noon. He reported that the first problem arose after the patient began to bleed from the right cheek, causing them to start administering anticoagulant. All this without doing glucometer control to check blood sugar levels, which later shot up to high levels. However, Dr. Kevin didn't want to do anything about it, arguing that requesting the necessary material would cost a lot of money.
He also rejected the suggestion to call an ambulance, saying it would be very expensive.
He practically left the stability of the glucose in his patient's body to chance, and the result was devastating and irreparable.
Dr. Rojas tells Dr. Malu that the best thing is to transfer her to a care center because she needs to be better monitored, connected to a mechanical ventilator because it provides oxygen to a patient constantly.
Although the clinic was equipped with some devices that could help her, it did not have enough to provide the care that could have saved her life, so nothing they did in that hospital room could work. Floridalma lost their lives, and later their body was removed in the most terrifying way possible. What then motivated Dr. Death to want to cover up such negligence was precisely that dark case that occurred in the year 2019. He knew perfectly well that if he were involved in another similar situation, not only would his reputation be affected, but he would probably lose his medical license. He wanted to save himself before facing his glaring mistakes and was willing to do anything, even section the body and put it in a suitcase. That was the first option, although as we know, his decision to move the body in a garbage container was caught on camera.
Mrs. Roque was in the black container intact. She was holding the edges of that container with some rubber hooks. Mr. Malu said that he was going to do that with the people he already knew. When we lowered Mrs. Roque's body to the basement, he lifted her up with me because he asked for my support. Mr. Malu took the lady's body to his house.
Nurse Louise was able to see exactly under what conditions the body was introduced into the container, but he did confirm that at some point the sound of a saw was heard coming from the room where Dr. Kevin was finalizing the details for the solution to the problem that was bothering him. He also said that the next day he saw Nurse Susana wearing Mrs. Roque's clothes and sitting in a wheelchair, thus confirming the theory that she had been posing as her. Then, after these incredible statements, the defense of the accused doctor requested to declare the case under seal. On what grounds? Under the promise that this man would finally reveal the location of the now deceased's body.
From the beginning, we expressed our disagreement because they put the case partially under seal. Chatting with prosecutors from the public ministry, we came to the conclusion that at the end of the day, my main goal is to find my mother. And if by finding a way for this gentleman to speak, we could find her, we agreed that the case would be partially confidential.
That's how, in a hearing, the doctor, a year after the events, revealed the location of his deceased patient's remains, which were found in early June of the year 2024 through an operation on a farm in Palin, Escuintla. This is in Guatemala. After the excavations, bone remains appeared in the municipality of San Vicente Pacaya, whose identity is still unknown at this time. However, the chances that it is Floridalma are too high. Given the request for case confidentiality, it is only known that a new hearing is expected on July 2nd, in which the nurse Luis Castro will continue to reveal details of such a chilling crime or event, while Kevin himself will be able to give his own version of the facts.